Hi. So the question about should person do eccentrics is not that simple, because first of all there are two types of eccentrics. There is like the sub-maximal eccentric, which you just do normal repetitions, whereas there is the eccentric and the concentric. Obviously, if you are repping this out so that you can do the concentric, meaning the lifting up, it means that the weight is not maximal, so it is below maximal weights. But then there is also the overload eccentric, in which you are using weights which are above your maximal weights, and you are just trying to lower them slowly. Like these two eccentrics are totally different. And hence to ask, should we do eccentrics, is not that simple. Because do you mean eccentrics as if just doing reps and somehow leaving out the lowering part, but still doing the concentric part? Or do you mean should we do reps as if using weights which we cannot lift, and then slowly resisting the lowering of them, doing this with weights more than we can lift, but which we can still lower, since you can lower a bigger weight than you can lift with the concentric lift. So I looked a little bit into this, and it would appear that there are benefits on doing both the submaximal eccentric but also the overload eccentric. Obviously, as it is true that the overload eccentric, it taxes your body more. So one benefit of doing, if you still consider doing the overload, like the overload concentric is a powerlifting like method. It is a method to get stronger, since there is data to suggest that training actually makes you stronger. And by the way, as a side note, in the West Side barbell system, that would seem like being a totally different strength. Like the West Side barbell wants to train all different types of strengths, as if you train your dynamic, the speed, and then you train your max, like how much. The first was how fast, but then the third could be how much can you lower with your eccentric, controlled lowering. I don't know, that would seem like a interesting experiment to add to somebody's protocol of the west side purple method, adding the overload eccentric. But then should one do the submaximal eccentric, the lowering? Like, there is some evidence from Achilles tendon studies that doing that like helps you tendons, because in some kind of therapy there are therapy interventions. For example, you Achilles tendon rehabilitation, in which you bring yourself to the position where your calf is totally flexed, and then you put the weight on that calf and you just lower it. And you just do this lowering part with submaximal weights. And this actually reduces the stiffness of the tendon. So there is evidence that there is that kind of therapeutic benefit of doing the eccentric, keeping the eccentrics in the set when you are normally doing them, so that you rise it up and lower it down. Obviously it does add to fatigue since you are doing them both. But there is evidence that actually doing the submaximal weights eccentric, there is less fatigue in it than doing the submaximal concentric. So it's not totally true that it fatigues you more. But obviously if you do them both, you will get more fatigue than if you just do one of them. So there's that. What is also interesting about the overloading eccentric is that when you do statics, and more specifically when you are doing the yielding static, like there is overcoming static and yielding static. Overcoming static is the static in which you are trying to move an unmovable object, which doesn't obviously then move, and yielding static being the static in which you are just trying to resist a force. For example, holding a dumbbell just here, where the gravity is trying to open your fingers up. Like it's interesting that the failure in the yielding static will result in an overload eccentric training. In other words, overload eccentric training is a failure of yielding static. And since all of these three, the overcoming static, yielding static, and overload eccentric are strength building principles, it would be interesting to try to figure out ways how one could integrate these in the same lifts. For example, like it would be easy to integrate the yielding static and the overload eccentric, since the overload eccentric results in the failure in the yielding static. But also it would be interesting to find other ways of integrating static lifts and eccentrics.